Bundles of crazed meteors offer the counter subject to the sedacious aria shattered by thunder. The sky is an alternation of remote lights and downpour of darkness, and Roberto writes that he saw foaming Alps within wanton troughs whose spume was transformed into harvest, and Circes blossomed amid sapphire glints, and at intervals in a cascade of roaring opals, as if her Telluric daughter Persephone has taken command, exiling her plenteous mother. Today, I want to talk about another foundation of my understanding of literature, that being Umberto Eco. A little background on how I discovered Eco. I actually don't remember too well, but I remember reading him at 23 or attempting to read the Prague Cemetery at 23 and just getting bodied, just seeing how esoteric it was and all these references that I couldn't understand. So I put him away for a while. And eventually, I think, maybe like 5 years later or so, in 2018, I got tired of it and just not reading him. So I finished Pynchon and I finished most of Joyce. So I decided to read all of his fiction within 1 year time span. And I did it. And I was really grateful. There were some things I might have been a little fast on. This is V. So I read all 7 of his actual novels, not just the Pynchon one. And I loved it. It was amazing. It got me excited about history. I did a little fast. There were some books I probably could have spent a bit more time on, but I think a second reading really suited. And it was just such an amazing experience. And just to see how much knowledge and how much you can pack into a book. It reminded me again of Pynchon and Joyce, but in a way that was a lot more hardline academia. Not to say Joyce and Pynchon aren't academic, but this one is just like, you can tell Eco is on a different level. And to give a bit more context to that, let's go over the background of Umberto Eco. And unfortunately, he has passed away, but he was a man who was the lead figure in the field of semiotics, the study of sign and symbol, something that I'm still needing to dive into myself. I have one of his semiotic books, based on something called like The Future of Semiotics. I only have like a base day one classroom college level understanding. However, it's the study of signs and meaning and how meaning is ascribed, not even just between living beings, but between animals, technology, and all these different ways. And how you can't have, I believe it's like you can't have a symbol without the sign or vice versa. And Eco Umberto was the lead figure in that. He paved the way. He taught at, I believe, multiple universities, if I'm not mistaken. And he kind of cemented his place in history just in that field by itself. But then he decides to publish a bunch of quirky essays and 7 amazing books of fiction. That being said, what are some of the stuff that makes Umberto Eco special? Well, he's actually, despite all that academic stuff I talked about, he's actually a really funny, quirky writer. He does stuff like his characters misnaming the parts of the boat, and he says, like, if you feel like that takes away from the story, too bad. But also, he's not afraid to get into the dells of history. The small, esoteric, nobody knows about who is this person. But he does this to serve a point as well. He's not just doing it just to flex his academic muscles. He does it to show the interlocation of fiction and reality. A great example of this interlocation that I'm talking about is when the Spaniards came to the Americas and conquered the Aztecs. They had 12 Franciscan monks come to replicate the 12 apostles of Christ because they believed that Mexico, soon to be called Mexico, was going to forbear the new Messiah, the new Jesus. And that's why they had the 12 there to assist them in leading the quote-unquote savages and the Dark Continent into the New World. Conversely, with the Aztecs, they let the Spaniards in because the Spaniards and their priests with the long robes and the white face and the long beards mimicked their own Messiah, Quetzalcoatl. So that's why they let a lot of the priests come in, and that's why they let a lot of shared information. Even though they're a warrior tribe, they were more receptive to that because they look like the Messiah. So with that, you see these myths and how they affect policy, how they affect nations, and how they affect life and death and humanity
things that are common nowadays that are not necessarily looked at as necessarily fact, or we can see in a more religious context, but not in a scientific context, were very big indicators of the destiny of a lot of different nations throughout the world, and especially the history of Mexico. So that's just what I mean by the interlocation of history and myth, politics and myth, fiction, and just all coming together. And these things that we don't take as real nowadays had very huge and dire consequences in the past.
And even though in those examples they're much more religious in a sense, you have to remember myth doesn't apply just to special creatures or events. It also applies to ideologies that exist within the present time, that might not be supernatural, might not be spectacular. An example in college that we taught and kind of exists today is that the American myth is that you work for what you earn. And that's not necessarily true. There's a lot of factors that hold people back, whether it be birth, race, status, class. All these factors hold us back, but we still peddle that American myth. And there's a lot of different examples of that as well. How Umberto applies that through that interlocution is that the idea of one, fake news in a sense, that'd be the modern terminology, but misinformation, or blatantly racist text that was meant to deceive the populace. Species that were thought to be alive, that turned out not to be true whatsoever. I'm going to address that in my Bottolino summary with a bunch of special animals. A lot of them that were quoted by, of the time, historians like Pliny the Elder or Herodotus. So a lot of them believed in to be scientific in a sense. Some of them you can even see in bestiaries. A great example of this would be a unicorn, once believed, but then it's not actually real. Or a Kirin from Japanese mythology is actually just a giraffe. But the main way Umberto Eco also goes about this is with ideology, and that being racist ideology or flagrantly false ideas like the anti-Semitism associated with the Jews and all the myths that were made up about them controlling the world, the Knights of the Templar and their control of the world. Umberto Eco is really into conspiracy. That kind of puts him into the postmodernist like Pynchon. And he combines all these facets of history to comment on our daily routine, our daily lives, the things that we go through. But what makes it even more horrifying is when you go in there and you realize that, no, these people are real. They're doing the same thing that we've been doing. There's so many times in these books, especially the Prague Cemetery, in that even though I'm reading about something from 100 years ago, or even more so, or even from the 1700s or even the 1100s, I realize that I'm really reading about my time. I'm really reading about how misinformation can destroy us, how it can incite rule, how it can change the populist ideas. A great example from this is from the Name of the Rose. The main character is asking the Franciscan priest about the pastorale, and they tell him that the pastorale is a group of shepherds who killed the Jews. They were very poor people in a village, and the lords of the land and the church of the land was taking the money from them. So what they did is that the church and the main enforcement of the government put the blame on the Jews, saying they control the money. They're the reason the money's going away. So all the shepherds went and killed a bunch of the Jews. And the main character asks, why didn't they attack the church? Why didn't they go for the people who were actually harming them? And the Franciscan priest says it was too big of a target. And I believe that's really indicative of almost all of Umberto Eco's literature, in that we target the wrong things. We don't handle the right solutions because they're too big, and the powers that be can make fiction that interposes on real life. Almost like the sign and simulacra theory, simulation and simulacra up there. I don't remember the author's name, unfortunately. I'll put it down there. But that the simulation overrides reality, kind of like in the Luis Borges story that he mentions, where somebody wants a detailed map, an exact detailed map, and it goes over the earth, and it kind of just blends in and gets destroyed into the earth. That, in the sense that the simulation, the false reality, no matter what it is, overtakes our reality and becomes it. And that's just a lot of things that Umberto Eco get at. Now, I think an important thing would be to go through the summaries of each one.
Now, The Mysterious Flame of Queen Leona is a book about nostalgia, especially for Umberto Eco. It is about a man, an older gentleman who's an antique bookseller who lost his memories and is trying to regain them by going through his grandfather's attic and reclaiming his childhood memories. He does this through various things like looking at cigarette packaging, reading books that were changed, kind of whitewashed so the French names are put into Italian, and also reliving his memories of what it was like to live in Mussolini's reign and all the horrible injustices that entailed with that as well.
And The Name of the Rose is Umberto Eco's first book, and funnily enough, he actually doesn't like that book too much. However, I do think, and I think the general populace agrees, that it's one of his most pleasurable. It's set in the Middle Ages, where there is a Franciscan and his apprentice going to an abbot, and they're solving a mystery there, a murder mystery actually. But the main crux of the book, and a lot of the meat in it, because besides being a fun murder mystery, is that it really shows the historical importance of the church and the political importance and the political dilemmas that go on with it as well. Somebody being an atheist and getting away from Catholicism, it really didn't bring me back into it, but appreciated it more. But also gave me let me be able to have a more critical eye towards it. Learning about the different factions between the Franciscans, the Benedictines, and the Dominicians. Learning how things that would seem more commonplace and in some ways taken for granted, like the poverty of Christ, and how that was introduced, but also how it took very much political pressure through the various bishops and the Pope in order to get that through. And this made me appreciate more church thinkers like Thomas of Aquinas, somebody who brought back the Greek thinkers into theology, even though at one time they were considered pagan thinkers because they were outside the realm of the church, but also how much intelligence is there, but also how things get designated to paganism when it's proper that we should learn about them. And the church and science and philosophy aren't mutually exclusive. And that is actually one of the core themes of the book, without spoiling anything. But if you got to the end, you know the know.
The Days of the Island Before. It's one of Umberto Eco's most sentimental books, in that it's about a man who is on an abandoned ship, totally isolated, doesn't know how he got there exactly, brings up his memories that he went through a giant storm. However, he starts writing down his life. He starts writing down about his love. And through that, he starts writing, exploring a lot of ideas of scientific discovery at the time, like how to find, I believe, longitude, and also how God flooded the earth, and that he took the water from the day before. And in large part, it's a book that shows how science has changed and how science is more of a process than finding an answer, and that all the different aspects that we go through to come to the certain conclusion that it's all agreed upon by scientists, and how all the crazy, in a sense, logical, because they make sense within their own reasoning, but they're totally BS scientific ideas, like how if you cut yourself, the atoms from the sword can go back to the wound, or some effect like that. I believe he also talks about the different forms of evolution as well. But it's just a beautiful little book, and has a great insight to like a great little fan fiction of like Jesus Christ and of the battle with Satan near the end of the book, which is one of my favorite sections by Umberto Eco.
Now, the Prague Cemetery is my favorite Umberto Eco book. It is the one that means the most to me because it talks the best about racism, how racism develops, especially in this case, which is something important to me, anti-Semitism, and how fake news has propagated that, and the sources of where that came from, and the intentions behind it. Mainly starting with, the book is detailing the Protocol of Zion, a racist text that even my dad was heard about when he was younger, that outlines, quote-unquote, the Zionist plan to take over the world. Because it's an important text because it was referenced in Mein Kampf, and Henry Ford disseminated it throughout America. And it just shows a lot of the beginnings of the 1900s early anti-Semitism, but the book never tells you what the book document it is. It just shows you a document that's being created, and it just shows you, unfortunately, like how we see nowadays, how profitable fake news is, how profitable racism can be, and the fact that they're using a lot of the same lingo and things haven't really changed.
Bottolino is the closest you're going to get to a straight-up fantasy with Umberto Eco. Again, it has a huge metahistorical context in that several figures are trying to find the old John Pester and the lost tribes of the Israelites. And you just see a lot of great creatures, like a bunch of ones that seem so fantastic, like creatures that have big ears, who have 1 foot, or who are dogmen. However, they're all quote-unquote recorded animals from like places like Pliny the Elder, some are from Herodotus, because misinterpretation or myths that were thought to be believed at the time. I read it at the end of Umberto Eco's books, so I was a little burnt out by that time, but if you want a hard meta-historical fantasy novel, this is really, you really want to go for. You will see things like the Rock and chimeras, and just different like potions and stuff like that. It's just a whole lot of fun, and they travel several different nations. Number 0, I feel, is Umberto Eco's most cynical work, and it's also his last one. It's about a tabloid worker who talks about the news agencies of Italy, and how in Italy the news agencies are directly owned by the political parties. It's reflective of, Foucault's Pendulum. There's not as much for me to talk about at this one, just because it's so short. It's only like 120 pages. It's the shortest work, but it also just kind of covers a lot of the themes of like fake news, and this one really gets more into like the modern side of fake news in that sense. Foucault's Pendulum is Umberto Eco's biggest work. It is his Gravity's Rainbow. It is his Ulysses. It's about a bunch of newspapermen editors who decide to make a conspiracy theory, and they go balls deep in this theory. And it's crazy because you see, this is Umberto Eco flexing his muscles to an insane degree. He's Ronnie Coleman in it. He's putting so many references, so much historical things that in some ways, it almost doesn't work as a novel, in my opinion, just because at points it just feels like it reads more like an encyclopedia, but an encyclopedia of falsehoods at the same time. But I know I'm a bit more in the minority about that opinion. I still have to reread this book again just because there's so much density packed into it. But in terms of just like literature and showing off what you know and just packing it all in, this is a great example of it. And in a lot of ways, I really appreciate what he's done with the book. He shows how you can be intellectual and not so much plot driven and still just, have an amazing book at the same time. Definitely recommend, but approach with trepidation. It's brutal.
Now, where to start with his books? I'd probably recommend from easiest to intermediate, if you're just kind of like a beginning reader, go for Numero Zero. You're gonna get a taste of Umberto Eco, but it's the shortest book like you saw. It's kind of like Pynchon's Lot of 49, but not as difficult, short, not gonna get bogged down in the history. It takes place in the modern day, so it's gonna be pretty understandable. Next, if you're into fantasy novels, like a lot of big YA novels, or even stuff like Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, I guess, I'd probably say Bottolino. It is his most fantastical novel, and there are some slow parts here and there, but you're just gonna get a great sense of adventure, puzzles, and just mystery, and a lot of it were just ideas and myths that take place in our history, which is pretty cool. And for the more intermediate who just kind of wants to get more into it, but you don't want to go for like Name of the Rose or Foucault's Pendulum, I'd recommend the series Flem Leone. I feel like this is the most accessible but the most Umberto Eco book out there. You're just going to get a lot of the historical context. You're going to get a lot of that deep emotional human impact. And also, this book just has so many cool illustrations in it. Like, I don't give a crap about cigarettes. I don't smoke, but there's so many cool like ads like that with cigarettes, or here's a bunch of movie posters, and you're just gonna get that throughout all the book. I learned the name for it at the International Book Fair. It's called ephemera because it's ephemeral and it disappears so easily. So that's what I would recommend going for. And in terms of Eco's prose, he's pretty straightforward. It's just like the being bogged down in history. The passage I read at the beginning of the video, that's Eco at his most literary. But an idea, and this is what the book chemist commented on, he disagreed, but I kind of agree with Eco in that, I guess, pertaining to the idea of semiotics, is that even if you don't know all the individual ideations of the different factions going against each other, as long as you know what Group A is doing, what Group A's intention is, and what Group B's, and how it's going to react to Group B, and whose side the character is on, you're going to be able to get through the novel, even if you don't know everything about it. Because there's so much in there, you don't want to be stopping out a Wikipedia page every 5 pages, unless you're into that. So with that, let's go into the conclusion. Reading about Umberto Eco is reading about our political situation. It's reading about the issues in history that are present right now. and the history that we're making, and just learning how we do go about that and how these ideations are made. And again, it's just that old cliche beaten to hell that you've heard since high school, that history is circular, that people who don't know history are bound to repeat it. And Umberto Eco really shows that. The more you delve into it, the more you're just going to see a mirror of yourself, of our times. And with all that said, though, he is a beautiful author, and he does give us a power in knowing where these ideations came from, where this language came from, where the illocutionary meaning behind certain veiled statements are actually getting at. And through that, we can have the power and this discernment in order to recognize it and call it out for what it is. And, that's really, I feel like, the main reason why to read Umberto Eco. Not just for an understanding of history, but for an understanding of ourselves.